And just like that, it's now time for my number 11 team in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive series. It's the Los Angeles Rams. Thanks for coming back, everybody. Make sure to like and leave a subscription and a comment in the comment section below. All that YouTube-y stuff to really help me out, push this out in the algorithms to other football fans and Rams fans and whatever. Because we're really crunching down here on the preseason. And one of the big stories from the Rams is Matthew Stafford. He's a real X factor here. I tried to grade him accordingly, to be honest. He's become this veteran quarterback where he's load management has become a thing for him. And that's a real task for Coach Sean McVay and Mike LaFleur, who's a great offensive staff, one of the best offensive combinations in the entire league. And that really keeps the motor running here because they did have a little turnover in some positions, specifically at the wide receiver room. They did give up Cooper Kupp, but they brought in Davante Adams, which is going to be a slight upgrade, at least to some degree. But you kind of lose Cooper Kupp's consistency to acquire Davante Adams' upside for Matthew Stafford. Now you also have Jimmy Garoppolo as a backup. He may be getting more playing time than people are expecting, especially down the stretch as Stafford is sort of working out these injuries that he has here. No sign that Stafford is going to be injured for the whole year, so we'll skip over that. The offensive line is I'm skeptical of the offensive line. I think they have some good players, but we'll get to why I think that they are, again, sort of just holding this team back to a degree. They have a really great running back room, with Kyron Williams, Blake Corum. I think is going to get some more playing time up here as well. The depth of the wide receiver room is also something that's really fantastic. Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington adding into that Puka Nacua, Davante Adams combination. Can't sleep on Tyler Higbee either. Those contributions being now like the number 6 target in the offense, probably not going to be that high. From the defensive side of the ball, they had Jared Verse break out in his rookie season. Fantastic rookie season. They have Kobe Turner out there as well. They signed Poona Ford to play a nose tackle role. So they got some bodies there on the defense that they're going to allow to continue to grow here together. Braden Fisk, a great interior defensive lineman. Hopefully he can improve on the running game aspect. The linebackers, sneaky talented to a degree. Sneaky talented way. We'll get to them as well. The real weak point of this team for me is going to come in the secondary that we'll cover. They're in desperate need of some improvements there from the cornerback position. They got a good nickel. They got a good little safety group going on. But the outside corners, there's a lot of just lack of excitement for me. And there's some free agents out there like Asante Samuel Jr., who I'm very surprised they haven't gone out and signed, just because it would raise them up significantly more so than it would any other team. But at the end of the day, this falls on the coaching staff and how they're going to put these players in the right position to succeed. And it starts with Sean McVay, the head coach. It's a 91 grade, 9th overall. He's inside the top 10 here as a head coach. I really like Sean McVay. I think that he, from an offensive scheme perspective, he settled in really nicely. It's really a scheme that he's developed a real chemistry with the entire offensive staff, and him being able to give more power over to Mike LaFleur, the offensive coordinator, who comes in as 5th for me. It creates an environment for this offense where there's so much continuity. When you got these two guys on the same page, it allows McVay to take that step back. And I've talked about this in other videos with other coaches where you want the coach to be able to eventually just take that step back and become more the CEO type than he is this coordinator play caller. Now, Sean McVay is obviously going to have a tremendous influence over the overall offense, but you have now Mike LaFleur, who's been groomed over the last couple of seasons to eventually take over that spot. And a huge advantage of having the offensive head coach to the quality of Sean McVay is that the likelihood that Mike LaFleur is going to be a long-term guy is just not high. It's just not a likely thing that's going to occur on a long-term basis. And you're going to have one of these guys that's developing underneath as a position coach or as a run game coordinator or as a pass game coordinator to eventually step up. And their job is going to be mostly this year to keep that offensive line functioning, put them in positions to succeed, and get the ball out of Matt Stafford's hands quickly, because Stafford is picking up that injury bug more and more, sort of getting back to what he was before, where it was like sort of this injury-prone quarterback that had a lot of great performances, but you kind of anticipate you weren't going to have him for every single regular season game. So that's going to be their real task this year, is getting that offensive line back up to speed, getting them to work in continuity, getting the running game going as well. I think that is why you draft Blake Corum last year. You want to get him more involved. And then you have Chris Shula, who comes in, 19th defensive coordinator for me. He's a decent DC. He's done some really good stuff last year. Getting Jared Verse and Kobe Turner and Braden Fisk, getting these guys. He was handed a lot of blue chip talent. A lot of investment was made in getting him guys that would have produced a really good defense for him, and he actually worked it out pretty well. With those young players that he has, he's really did a good job of developing himself as a pretty decent play caller. Now, it wasn't a truly this elite level defense, so it's kind of hard to put him much higher than this, but he definitely did a good job making the most out of the talent he was given. When you get a first and second round interior, first round edge, a second round interior defensive lineman who have like a built-in chemistry back in their college days, to be able to have that come to fruition at the pro level, that does speak to him, but he was given the pieces to do that. I'm more looking at what he's going to be able to do with that secondary that really doesn't look like it's going to be filled with that high-end talent needed. So how's he going to scheme up this defense this season to put that secondary that's lacking the talent in a position to succeed? That's the real test for Shula this year. And that's really going to be the decision on whether or not he's going to be somebody who should be retained, I think, as a defensive coordinator for this team, because developing the players that are can't miss is not really as impressive. That's sort of like par for the course for a defensive staff and a defensive coordinator. Now, when you have the under the radar talents, Omar Speets is a good example. He had a good year last year, a very quietly a good year last year. So that speaks to Shula. That's why he gets into the top 20 for me, because he did find a way to create with a player that nobody was really expecting. But when we get to the secondary, I'll be able to point out more clearly just how there's certain players there that you question, are these guys starters on any other team? And that used to be the case back in the Raheem Morris days, where it was the defensive line. Outside of Aaron Donald, you're kind of looking at the defensive line going, okay, Donald kind of carries this group, but Raheem Morris was also able to scheme those guys up really well to make them effective. Shula's now going to have to do that with the secondary, now that there is no Jalen Ramsey there for him. There is no Trey White anymore, even though Trey White, was what he was. It's a lot of just older veterans mixed in with younger guys with a lot to prove. And outside the safety group and the nickel with Lake and Kinchins and Curl, what do you got going on outside? How he develops those outside guys, how he schemes up those outside guys from week to week, considering the matchups that they're going to be facing. You got Marvin Harrison Jr., you got Cooper Kupp, you got Jackson Smith and Jigba, you got, Brandon Ayuk, Ricky Pearsall. There's some slot guys in there where, you can match up a Quentin Lake from an athletic profile. I don't know that he's going to be able to go man-on-man with a guy like JSN, for example, right? So the scheme is going to have to really come into play here to make up for those deficiencies they're going to have just on the outside. And if you can get some outside performances from Darius Williams this year, get him back to what he was when he sort of peaked here with the Rams in years past before he ended up departing to Jacksonville, then Chris Shula shoots up tremendously and could sneak into being one of the defensive coordinator head coaching hires. He's sort of on this weird pendulum for me almost, where if everything goes better than expected, then he's like Jonathan Gannon in the next coaching cycle. If it goes bad, then he could be like a an in-season firing, because this is a team that's offense is going to be functioning at such a high level. So the defense really just has to come in and do its part, because you have an offense that, as long as it stays healthy, is going to be able to be scoring lots of points in a game. So if you're out there in shootouts, kind of like the way the Bengals were, for example, last year, and you're losing games, Shula's not long for this world, and somebody else on this defensive staff is going to get elevated here. I don't know how much patience Sean McVay and the overall front office will have with poor defensive outings, especially because they are being set up to succeed by having an offense that's going to put opposing teams in a much more one-dimensional box offensively, because they're going to be playing keep up for most of the game. So you're going to be able to sort of pin your ears back off the edges with Verse and with Byron Young and Nick Hampton and those kinds of guys. You're going to be able to mix and match your interior defensive line with some of the pieces that you have as well and really elevate that group. And then you just want to make it easier for the guys on the outside. So, but from Mike LaFleur's perspective here, from an offensive perspective, you got Puka Nacua now, you got Davante Adams. So you've got these pieces that you can do so many different things with, and how much Sean McVay sort of lends out to Mike LaFleur to be creative sort of on his own, and how much input he's going to have, that's going to be something to watch. Because I think when you have a guy like Davante Adams who can play everywhere across the wide receiver, in every single position, in every single lineup, and be effective and create separation and be a real matchup nightmare, you have to be able to take advantage of that. And I think when you have Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell, who can play on the outside as well, how much are you going to spread it out? How much are you going to spread out the opposing defenses with all these different types of weapons out there, and how will you scheme them up? What will be the route combinations you'll be using? And then when are you going to be smart enough to spread them out an extra time and then run that draw play with a Kyron Williams? That's going to be something to watch from week to week with them, is how often they're going to use the plethora of weapons they have and how creative they get with them. It's about this time that I come in here with an ad break, but I don't have ads yet. I've been saying this for 20 videos now. Just like the video, subscribe, and maybe this will be a real ad break with a real, use my code when signing up stuff. So very rarely is a veteran Super Bowl winning quarterback considered to be an X factor and a wild card for a team and how well they're going to produce. But Matthew Stafford falls directly into that category. He's about 15th and 16th. He's right there with Aaron Rodgers as being like this weird veteran quarterback position where what's he going to give you? There's the injury bug that's running through training camp right now with him that's drawing a lot of red flags out of people. That's why you maintain a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo as a backup, because he's probably the best backup quarterback that there is in the entire league. And he's going to serve a tremendous purpose, it seems, on this team of being this safety blanket, because Stafford's health is such in question. And he's still, when he got traded, that would seem to be like the time where, it flipped the switch. He was able to really execute, take advantage of the situation. Ever since then, he sort of has gotten the old man quarterback general gradual regression. Like the ball placement and the accuracy and the arm talent, and the arm strength is just slowly weaning off. The deep balls, intermediate, shorts, he's not really elite in either one of those scenarios. Where he really is elite is in the play action and when he gets time to pick apart, because, he does have the mental aspect of the game. That part never really leaves you. It's the legs that leave you. It's the arm that leaves you. So he still has that, and he still executes that at such a high level. Even against the blitz, he's still better than most when they pick it up. But when he's been under pressure, especially last year, he's as bad as any quarterback that you could put out there, which is a tremendous concern, because he just can't escape anymore. He doesn't really have the quicker
that quick release. Like it's just a touch a little bit slower, which is allowing guys to get to him, putting the ball off target, getting him a little off timing, a little off platform. And it's just thrown off his game just enough where there is tremendous concern. And that's why it was no surprise that throughout this entire draft process, teams, there was like a buzz going around, with the different, draft networks that they were looking at quarterback. And that's why the New York Giants traded up, was to get Jackson Dart, and then the Rams immediately trade out with the Atlanta Falcons and get an extra first-round pick next year. That screams we're going into the quarterback market next year. So this could very well be, and likely is, Matthew Stafford's final season with the team. How is he going to respond to that sort of looming, that obvious looming over his head? Because it's sort of looming over his head the same way it's been looming over the head of Aaron Rodgers, who, not for nothing, has had a better year than people, I think, give him credit for last year. I think Stafford's sort of the same thing, but is the regression going to continue to hit him? And I'm really concerned with Stafford in that sense. He still has the flashes, but the big time throws, there aren't as many, like what we're used to seeing with him. There's way more turnover-worthy plays. The adjusted completion percentage, the overall accuracy just isn't at the higher level that we're used to with him either. So the assumption is that he's going to be able to maintain the ability of just like flat smack dab in the middle quarterback, and that's going to be enough because the scheme's going to be really strong. The weapons around him are going to be strong, and the offensive line is going to be serviceable enough to keep him upright for most of the season, with the potential to excel into being a top-level offensive line. So he really is just sort of in this bubble where he needs to very much just stick and trust the scheme and trust the process of the play, because he's not in a position where he can truly improvise the way he maybe used to back in his days in Detroit, even back in his first year here with the Rams. The body's just continuously breaking down with him. He's just not on top of it like we're used to seeing with him. So that's going to be very much something that you have to watch with Matthew Stafford coming up to this year, because he could be the make or break overall. He does have the 8th ranked weapons group it's a wide variety of weapons here, all different types, guys that can play all over the place, with 2 legit number ones, which is a rare thing for him to have. Because you come out here and you start with Puka Nacua, who really just slid in as this late round pick, fit the offense really well. They understood how to use him. A really great outside threat. A third of his snaps can be taken from the slot, so he's a little variety mismatch guy, kind of like what you see with Mike Evans, what we've covered in the past. Got some sure hands, only 3 drops, less than a 4% drop rate. Just under 1,000 yards, wasn't really healthy at all last year. So it's hard to truly grade him on what he could have been if he was healthy, able to get that to like the 130 plus targets like we were expecting to see, which would have taken him over 1,000 yards. The touchdowns might not have been there, but you got to love having these different wide receivers who can sort of take some attention away from him, open up the game a bit. He's one of these tricky wide receivers too, who really operates more in the intermediate to short areas, despite having like a sneaky athleticism to him. But I think now having a partner like Davante Adams next to him, it's going to open up more opportunities for Puka Nacua as well, because it's not sort of like Cooper Kupp, who really only served a purpose as a slot receiver, like a straight up slot guy. So when you bring in Davante Adams, who pretty much is a 50-50 guy, as you can see. From last year, he was like a 50-50 guy between the slot and outside. Having that versatility, that forces the opposing defense to find where he is every single play. And you can motion him into the slot. You can motion him from the slot to the outside. And the opposing defense is just not going to know what to do. Now, the one thing about Davante Adams that, I don't know, maybe Packers fans can relate a little bit more to this, having had him there for so long. I looked at the drops that he had last year and I went, holy crap, did he have an off season with his hands? And then I looked at what he did the years before that and I was like, oh, Davante Adams like drops balls all the time all year. A 10.5% drop rate is pretty standard for a Davante Adams season. So sort of losing the sureness of Cooper Kupp in this offense to go with more of the explosive upside that you're getting from Davante Adams is a pretty significant risk, because I don't know that he's that's sort of proven that he is what he is. He's a guy who's going to drop 10% of his targets, apparently. 10.5% of his targets, almost. It's a very weird aspect of Davante Adams' game that I was shocked to see. I don't know, you guys tell me in the comment section. Is this something that I've never really related that to Davante Adams before? Maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention to that aspect, but it was very jarring to see that that's the kind that he has those issues with drops that have sort of sustained throughout his entire career. Going back years, he had like 1 or 2 seasons where he wasn't like that, but for the most part, this is who he is. I have tremendous concerns about him being an issue like this that can cost the Rams now, which is why it's hard to grade him more than just an 88. Like, he produces when he does catch, like 85 catches, 1,063 yards, 8 touchdowns, considering he was sort of bouncing around from, one completely terribly run organization to another, just inconsistencies all over his entire season last year. He still produced statistically here. So I wonder if coming to a more stable environment that he'll be able probably to sustain these numbers now that he's more of a wide receiver 2 anyway. But I definitely, now I'm sort of like freaking out about like, oh my God, is Davante Adams going to cost the Rams a couple of games because he's going to drop some key third down pass? Because, he's still a great route runner. He's still great at creating separation. He can still be a matchup nightmare for everyone. You still kind of got to double him to avoid him getting open. But is he going to make a tremendously large mistake in a key game that's going to cost this team? And it definitely is a concern for me. You also have Tutu Atwell, who's sort of this really undersized receiver who has a very similar makeup to what we had in terms of his alignments as Puka Nacua did, where he's mostly going to be outside, but you can see him about a third of the time in the slot because he's going to do a lot of motion into the slot. He'll motion from the slot to the outside. He's got the sneaky speed to him that they really like to use. Now, again, he was sort of just settled in as his wide receiver 3 numbers here. You want to see him get maybe more targets going forward. But it was over. You'd think he'd be better behind the line of scrimmage than what he was in the screen game. He just wasn't. I wonder if that changes this year. Maybe that's something they use him more in and give him more opportunities in to actually have better performances in that sense. But it seems like his ability is to, because he's so small, it's kind of, I guess, harder for him to get separation. He takes littler strides. He's not like this long stride guy that you'll see from these bigger receivers, like Mike Evans, for example. He's going to take these little things, so it takes, to the intermediate level before he can create real separation, which is why I think that reflects in the deep to intermediate grades compared to the short and behind the line of scrimmage grades. It takes him a little bit longer to get the top speed. I think he's sneaky good, though, in terms of what he can do in traffic. I don't think he's necessarily afraid to put his nose in there and to stick his head in and all that, which I think is why he's gradually started to thrive in this offense. And I think as a wide receiver 3 option, they're going to be able to find things for him to do here, especially because when you have Nacua and you have Davante Adams can pretty much settle into being more of a slot receiver in this offense anyway because of the other bodies they have. It's going to open up a lot of one-on-one outside opportunities for Tutu Atwell. So I would expect there to be packages out there where Atwell is going to actually really excel, and I think that he can get these numbers up into more like the 60 catch range, 700 yards area with a couple of touchdowns. The one that's sort of breathing down his neck was Jordan Whittington, who had a tremendous preseason in his rookie year and then carried over some pretty good performances into the regular season. I think that just from his size perspective, him being a bigger guy, him being more akin to what you got in Puka Nacua than you do in this little Tutu Atwell type, it does open up maybe more opportunities for him, especially downfield, putting the ball in tighter areas, his catch radius being a lot better. I think, but again, we going back to the coaching area, what happens when all four of these guys are on the field at the same time and you spread them out and you're using little motions here and there, with Adams and Tutu Atwell? What does that look like? How are you able to then create these route combinations to have all these guys excel? I think there could be some games where Whittington and Atwell, will disappear, and I think there'll be games where they'll both excel. I think Davante Adams and Puka Nacua, as long as they stay healthy, will be the two consistent pillars of the receiving game, obviously. I think that's obviously going to be by design as well. I think they'll both be sitting around, hovering around like that 80 to 100 catches each. But then Tutu Atwell and Jordy Whittington will be like this week-to-week matchup type where, depending on what the opposing defense has in terms of cornerback depth, where the strength of their defensive back group is, are they a team that's going to get a lot of pressure, so you got to get the ball out? Is there going to be a team where you can take advantage of their size? Are they a taller squad? Are they a smaller squad in the secondary? That's really going to determine for me, from my perspective, what I think Tutu Atwell or Jordan Whittington will be able to produce from week to week. There's a couple other bodies out there that seem just more special teams types. I don't know that any of them are going to beat out for any significant reps. I think if there's an injury, we'll just see Tyler Higbee involved more in the offense. He's sort of this under-the-radar guy, but I don't know that he's going to be put in a position to truly be able to produce in the passing game because there's so many other bodies out here in Nacua, in Davante Adams, Tutu Atwell, Whittington, and even Kyron Williams out of the backfield as a running back. Another good receiving back. So I think Tyler Higbee's sort of just this guy that I think from a fantasy perspective you kind of avoid, but he is still a good 3-down tight end who's going to come in handy in these third down situations, in the red zone situations. That's where he's really going to live, is when the entire group is so focused on these receivers that they're going to be able to sort of sneak him in to certain soft areas of the zones and all that. So he'll have his moments throughout the year, I'm sure, but it won't be anything sustained or significant. He's not going to be like a George Kittle type of season, for example. He's sort of going to settle in as like a more traditional old school tight end level of production. Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. I think Corum, as he gets used to the pro game, as he gets more opportunities, he'll be breathing down Kyron Williams' neck a lot more. But I think just from a size perspective, Corum is going to suffer. Now, could he be used in a similar way to what they're going to do with Tutu Atwell as a receiver? Possibly, we'll see. But I think Kyron Williams still, especially with the contract extension he just got, is going to be, settling in as the majority running back one in this offense in all aspects. There is a level of trepidation for me because I do think that Kyron Williams is going to not be used like completely in this type of running game environment. I think from a third down perspective, he's pretty much got that locked in. I think as this every down back, I think there will be sort of pause in how much he's going to be used and how much he's going to be thrown out there and run into the ground, because there's a reason why you go out and you get Blake Corum last year in the draft. You get a healthy season out of him. He should be able to produce to you 8 to 12 carries a game, while Kyron Williams gives you, 13 to 20 a game. Maybe even 13 to 18, more likely than not, with a couple of catches. And you want to get Kyron Williams sort of out in space as well. I think Blake Corum can sort of weave in and out and be sort of hidden, sort of like a bigger version of Darren Sproles, Can sort of hide behind offensive linemen and be patient, but also have the quickness to get into the holes. You got Ronnie Rivers out there, Corey Schrader, who you picked up last year. You got Jarquez Hunter, the rookie, this year as well. So there is this open commitment that makes me believe that, okay, we're probably not going to see as much Kyren Williams, so I can't really use Kyren Williams' full overall grade here. So it does drop them to a lesser running back room. And I think just from the offense's design and what they have in the passing game, I just can't project that this running game is going to be used for anything other than specifically to set up a play action pass and to hopefully be able to run out the clock in games, late in games. I think they do have the bodies to be able to do that. And once you spread them out, you got these shifty running backs here who, once the defense completely empties out the box to account for these wide receivers that you have, you're going to be able to hit them with those inside draws and those trap plays out of the shotgun once they're all spread out, and you're going to get big plays out of that when you force the defense to play a lot smaller. But in a base defense, I have my concerns about what this running back room is going to be able to produce. Not for nothing, Kyren Williams came in last year for me as one of my top running backs, and he produced really well. 14 touchdowns, 1,300 yards. He did have 309 carries, though, which to me, that doesn't come across as sustainable for him. 50 missed tackles. You'd like to see maybe a little bit more than that, considering he had 300 carries. He did put the ball on the ground 5 times, which for 300 carries is not so bad, but there is ball security concerns perhaps there for him as well. He didn't have these giant breakaway runs, though. Having only 6 carries that went for 15 or more yards when you touch the ball 309 times, that tells me that you're taking a lot of punishment within the front 7. And that's another reason why I just don't feel comfortable with the long-term sustainability of him as the running back of this team, because clearly getting to that third level, getting to that safety, getting outside the box and getting downfield and being able to turn the corner and be on more of the safeties and defensive backs to be a little bit easier on the body and a little bit easier on the ground and pound a bit. It's just not there and wasn't in his game last year. So the constant physicality, I feel, is going to be something that's going to lead this team to go more towards the depth pieces, where they are going to see a little bit of a drawback in the quality naturally. Now, Blake Corum, I think, can eventually grow into being a much better back, into being a more true number 2. It's just not right now. It's just not so early on. So I want to see how they roll out Kyren Williams early in the year. Because the other thing is if Matthew Stafford's injured right now, and he's not 100% come week 1, but he's not injured enough to not play, you are going to be leaning on Kyren Williams in this run game a lot more earlier in the year. So you're going to put a lot of mileage on them early on in the season, which I think is going to be something that will hurt you later on for sure. So these are going to be all these things to watch, specifically surrounding this running attack. Do have a really good run blocking offensive line, which again is what sort of draws the concerns about Kyren Williams' ability to make the linebackers miss in the hole and not just take on contact so much. Because you can't just roll out an offensive line that has quality like this in the run game and not try to use the run game. It's just the concern about, this is going to be something they're really going to be able to fall back on as Stafford's injured if they're able to get a healthy rotation of the actual running backs. Because there isn't really an offensive lineman in this group that isn't a good run blocker or a quality run blocker. The issues obviously come in pass protection, where they're 21st for me. They do have some good bodies out here, for sure. Willie Lampkin, who I really like as a rookie, and Bo Limmer is going to be really good for the interior of the offensive line. I think, Warren McClendon is going to be a good swing tackle for you. You won't lose much in the running game, that's for sure. You're going to lose significantly in the pass blocking aspect, but you'll be able to maintain some level of the offense from a depth perspective. But you have Alaric Jackson as your left tackle. Joe Noteboom got completely beat out by him over the last couple seasons. He's a decent player. He's not some high ceiling left tackle. He's never going to be in the conversation of, Jordan Mailata and Laramie Tunsil and, Teron Armstead, whoever. He'll never be that guy. He's the guy who falls into that. I've used this before on some other players at different positions, but he's like the Kirk Cousins of tackles, where you're going to be looking around and be like, man, he's decent. He's good enough to start. We could do better, but who's available that's actually better? There's very few that are going to be available ever that are going to be better than him. So I think having him settle into this role, I think he's done very well, considering he was a former 6th round pick who had these like weird concerns about whether or not he was going to be a guard or a tackle at the next level, which did cause him to fall. And him being able to come in, beat out a guy that this team was very confident in, that gave a good contract to in Noteboom, coming off of the Andrew Whitworth years, gave up 22 pressures, 15 hurries. That's like, lower end starting caliber. And as the years go on, maybe he's just a slower study. And I think as you get better offensive linemen around him as well, I think as you incorporate the quick running game, more motion, and chipping at the line with the running backs and the tight ends, it will overall help him a lot better. He only took 7 penalties, which I think is a good sign. That's less than a penalty every other game, so there's something to look at for sure. And he also gives very similar output in the run game. He's a B+ to B- run blocker. Let's call it a B because, the zone percentage and the gap percentage were almost the exact same. So, he's a B run blocker with, I believe, potential to continue to grow in that role as well, because it's really rare that you have a guy who is able to play relatively consistently in terms of his quality output in both zone and gap. Generally you get linemen who are really good at one and then not so good at the other. This is a rare combination here that you only see from top level guys. So as he continues to grow in this role, we'll see how that run game is used and how he's able to grow, and like his chemistry that he has with left guard Steve Avila this season, who's another good run blocker. Doesn't really do too well in pass pro. We'll see how they sort of shift the offensive line around, because Coleman Shelton returning to this team after a little stint in Chicago there, we never really got his footing. I still think Coleman Shelton's a really good player, and it never really clicked to me why he didn't reach a level of success that he should have with the Chicago Bears. But now coming back to the Rams, I really like him to come in here. It's sliding right back into an offense he's really used to, right back into a role that he used to have. So, and then his responsibility is going to be, how he incorporates shifts and where he goes in pass pro to help out, because you would think that he'd have to go to Steve Avila, but that leaves Kevin Dotson sort of on an island of his own. And Kevin Dotson, despite being, a really good guard, since coming to the Rams, you sort of saw like a flip in his game. So when he was in Pittsburgh, he played left guard as opposed to the right, where his pass pro and left guard was significantly better than what he's shown as a right guard. These are pretty not great numbers for an interior offensive lineman in pass pro, considering you're functioning a lot with guys who aren't the most athletic. You're getting a lot of double team help for the most part. It's more about holding your ground than working on these athletes with all these fancy moves. But he completely flipped in his ability as a run blocker to become one of the better run blocking guards in the entire league. Like, he's up there top. Like, if you said he was a top 5 run blocker in the league, I wouldn't argue with you. And that only happened when he moved to the right side. So he sort of flipped his game on its head when he switched from one side to the other. And, an A in zone, a B in gap, but that A is a significant one. And to be able to turn around and hand the ball off to the right side, which they're probably going to have to do a lot early in the season, you're going to want him creating space. You're going to want him getting to that second level so that Kyron Williams and Blake Corum and Ronnie Rivers, Jarquez Hunter, whoever, can get to that third level to just take the tread a little bit off the tires here a bit. Rob Havenstein being there as well. I think that's a good 1-2 punch that you have on the right side of the offensive line. Havenstein sort of him and Braden Smith sort of fall into the same category as being these solid right tackles, these solid veteran options where you know exactly what you're going to get from them. And I think Havenstein is still a decent pass blocker, but his game is still the run game. And I think him and Dotson working together, they're going to be put to the true test early in this season to uphold this number 3 run blocking ranking, because it's a really good ranking. It's a really good group in that aspect. I do want to see them come together more in pass pro, and that comes from, maybe Coleman Shelton being able to communicate the shifts and being able to make the adjustments that need to be made for the offensive line, make them more clear, make them more concise. I think that can help them grow as well throughout the year as a pass blocking unit. And, I do have some really well-ranked depth guys here for sure, but I think that this group is the one that they're sort of settled in on, especially, bringing back 4 starters from the previous year, bringing back an old starter who's going to fit just in like a glove. I think the agenda is pretty clear on what they want this offensive line to be. And if it's clear they want them to be just, be a middle of the pack pass blocking group, just be good enough to keep Stafford upright and let him find the open guy. We got enough guys out there that someone's going to get open, and then and be maulers and athletic and make smart choices in the run game, and we'll be fine. So it is an upper half of the league offensive line for sure. It just maybe overall falls outside the top 10 because the pass blocking does have the red flag. It's more like a pink flag than a red flag. It's not quite red. So it is my 13th ranked offense, 14th in pass game, 20th in run offense, but they have such a good scheme that I got a lot of faith that they can sort of just sit there and hover around just outside the top 10 and have top 10 potential. They'll certainly have top 10 games. They'll have top 5 offensive performances. But I think that, there is the potential there that they could put out a couple of stinkers depending on the matchup they have against one defense or another, or if they end up in a situation where they have to be incredibly one-dimensional on offense. You don't want to allow, because of the pass blocking concerns, you don't want to allow an opposing defense to just be able to have their edge players pin their ears back and go after you. You want to create a balance in your offense to protect your offensive line from those situations. Now let's go to the defensive side of the ball. A defense that last year I think was a little bit better than people expected because you had so many guys like Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, Omar Speets. They played much better than I think people expected, even though I think people had high hopes for Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, your first and second round pick from a year ago. But as an overall defensive line, great defensive line. It's one of the best overall, just with how good they are, the type of rotation they're going to be able to have. 6th in pass rush, 9th in run defense, top 10 in both categories, really averaging out to probably being top 5 in the whole league. And it really starts with Jared Verse, second-year player now. He comes in with a 91 grade off the edge in pass rush. I know you're going like, oh, he only had 6 sacks. He was 6th in pass rush win percentage amongst eligible players. That is no small feat for a rookie. 77 pressures, 56 hurries, 15 quarterback hits. Now, the thing about edge players is you want to be able to put pressure on the opposing quarterback. We talked about this with Yaya Diaby as well, where if you can put all this pressure on an opposing quarterback, you're going to come through with a lot of success. Eventually, you're going to get the sack numbers to reflect what you're doing as a pass rusher to match the pressure you're putting on a quarterback. And you're going to be setting up other guys on your team to have a lot of success in terms of what their statistical output will look like at the end of the year. You're doing all the work and then everyone else is cleaning up. It's sort of like, Josh Allen on Jacksonville doing all the work and then Trevon Walker sort of just happening to run into the guy and get the sack. which, who's going to be that guy? Byron Young's going to be the one to benefit a lot from that. Nick Hampton, maybe rookie Josiah Stewart, who I'm really high on. Apparently no one else is. We'll get to that. But even what Jared Verse was able to produce in run defense, he was 11th in stops percentage for run defense with 2 forced fumbles, 35 stops. He had 41 solo tackles. He was everything that people were projecting him to be when they had him looking like he was going to be. I don't remember at the beginning of the draft cycle, people were saying number 1 overall pick. They were saying number 2 overall pick, top 5 pick. Then all the quarterbacks sort of came into play there, and it sort of bumped him completely out of the conversation. But the fact that he produced at this level, like he'd been in the league forever, like already an elite level edge player on both sides of the ball, that's something that can't be discounted. And it does scream sophomore slump, certainly, because now the expectations are so incredibly high on him. It's maybe unfair to expect for him to reach these numbers a second year in a row. You sort of expect there to be a down year perhaps. But even if he produces at 80% of what he did last year, he's still a really good number 1 edge player. And, adding different aspects to his game, experimenting with certain aspects of his game with pass rushing moves, playing with the instincts he's been playing, that hair on fire style with really good eyes and good hand placement. It's really difficult for me to see him having a significantly down season and not being like just an elite level edge player in all aspects of the game for the next 10 years. He is also playing next to a really strong interior offensive line, which does help. And it starts with Kobe Turner, who had the unenviable, responsibility of sort of replacing Aaron Donald when he came in as a rookie. Then he had to play in his second year. He had to basically replace Aaron Donald. He's still a really good interior pass rusher, like solid enough that he can play all 3 downs. You're going to be really confident with him in every situation. But his real talent is in run defense, which he was able to produce just tremendously as well. Him and Verse together were just such a good 1-2 punch on this defensive line for most of the year. And being able to have a true number 1 interior guy for the run game, that's a real asset to have. You want to be able to throw a guy out there who can do it all. And Kobe Turner, to a large degree, is one of the better interior defensive linemen in terms of the balance that he brings. So few guys have the level of balance that he has to his game. One of them that actually does have a very great balance to his game, very similar, is Poona Ford, who last year was absolutely incredible. Played a lot of mostly the traditional nose tackle role, A-gap, B-gap control. Mostly in the B-gap. I think he's going to come in here and he's really going to settle into the A-gaps, considering they have Fisk and Kobe Turner, who just aren't nose tackle types. But you see him, winning a lot from the nose tackle position. He had 46 A-gap snaps. When it was a pass play, he won often. He did really well in that scenario, coming off of double teams, especially considering mostly what you do when you're playing that 0-tech, 1-tech is you're facing a double team with the guard in the center. And you're being pretty much funneled into the exact area you need to get funneled into, and it's up to your 3-tech really to make the smart decision of which gap to take and the linebacker to fill the other to make the run stop. But he did really well against the run it gets 98th in stops percentage. But who runs? That's where 46 of his snaps there were in the A gap. Most of them were against the run. He had a couple against the pass. But still, in terms of gap control, he wasn't the one making the play, but he was the one setting up everyone on that Chargers defense to make the play. And that's why that Chargers defense really outplayed its worth with Poona Ford playing in that spot, and why he was able to really have this progression this late in his career. He's been in the league for a while now. He's always sort of been considered this rotational borderline starter. Now he's coming in here and he's arguably the best interior defensive lineman on the team. Him and Kobe Turner, I think in the world where you have a 4-man front, Verse, Turner, Ford, and Young is a hell of a front. Then you get to work in Braden Fisk in passing situations, so maybe that's when Kobe Turner takes a little bit of a breather. You can, if you want to get smaller, put him in passing situations for Poona Ford. You get very similar production in terms of that. So Braden Fisk, he really just needs to, and it's a size issue. I get it for the most part. So you want to see him develop a little bit in the run game, let him play a little bit more with a higher football IQ to make up for some of the size deficiencies that he has facing these bigger offensive linemen. Byron Young is sort of just out there on an island by himself. Whoever's out there in those situations, whether it's him, whether it's Brennan Jackson, Nick Hampton. I love Josiah Stewart. He produced amazingly at Michigan last year, and for some reason, no one in the league sees it. No one in the league thinks it's going to translate, and I think he's going to make a lot of people look silly if he gets the opportunity. I could see it happening. I could see him sliding in and being a number 2 guy. I don't know that his ceiling is all that high, but I think that he can come in and set a really nice high floor for you. And because I think he's a better player coming in than Byron Young is. But I think Byron Young obviously gets the opportunities here because he's more of a veteran presence. And just, I think Josiah Stewart just has a really high floor. Clearly, the league doesn't think that he has a very high floor at all, which is why he went when he went in the draft, and et cetera, et cetera. They have some good rotational pieces, situational guys for their interior as well. Tyler Davis, the rookie Tyler Hamilton. I think, that's an interesting little group there rounding out the 5. I don't know if Laurel Murchison makes the team. It'll be quite the competition because keeping 5 interior defensive linemen and 4 or 5 edge players seems to be the pattern here with the league for the most part. So we'll see what they decide to go with and how these competitions really iron themselves out. But if it were me, my edge players, it would be Verse, it would be Young, it would be Stewart, and it would be Brennan Jackson. And then I'd have Turner, Ford, Fisk, Davis, and Hamilton as my interior guys. And Fisk, because of his size and his athleticism, you could probably use him as like an early down defensive end type, especially in like short yardage situations too. So he can sort of bounce in and out of that role, maybe more than people think. I think obviously primary role interior defensive lineman, don't want him really outside the 4-eye tech all that much, but I think a 5 tech snap every now and then could be in his future. The linebacking group is, it's as average as it gets. We'll say, they did draft, Chris Paul to come in. He's sort of just, middling, I guess. There's not really anyone here that truly stands out as being like this elite guy. I think from a run defense perspective, they're middle of the pack. From coverage perspective, they're just at the fringe of the top 20. I wouldn't say that this group is a detriment or a liability. Because I think Omar Speets definitely quietly had a really strong performance last year, all things considered. As he gets more snaps, as he gets more involved in the defense, we'll see how that changes. But, 32nd in stops percentage, he didn't blitz all that much. Decent in pass coverage, kept everything in front of him, less than 10 yards a reception when targeted. He had 2 pass breakups. He's not like this big threat or anything like that. Kept the quarterback under 100 passer rating when he's targeted, so that's something. Only had 4 missed tackles. That's just under 6% missed tackle rate. You want to see them get under 5% with that this year, but maybe with more snaps that he gets, he'll be able to perform, because I thought that when he did perform, particularly in the run game, he did very well. They got Nate Landman coming over from the Atlanta Falcons, who I just kind of, very, very similar type of player. I think in pass coverage, he certainly did have a more down season. I do think, however, he still has the skill set. I just think that the Atlanta team, because of how poor the pass rush was, it did leave a lot of guys hung out to dry, particularly at the intermediate level, because Atlanta was so strong on the back end with AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates that the middle of the field, that middle intermediate area, was going to always be sort of just left to get picked apart. And that's why I think Landman sort of suffered from that. So I would look for him to bounce back. I think that he's a linebacker 2 quality in terms of his pass coverage. I think he's a low end along with Omar Speights. They're both kind of low end number one types against the run. So in the traditional 3-4 defensive set, we'll see them both on the field. And then even in the pass game as well, they're the two best ones. Troy Reeder's got some balance to his game. He'll be a good rotational piece. I think Chris Paul, the rookie, we talked about him. I think he could develop into something. Maybe Nate Landman's more of like a short-term guy. We'll see. There's not really a high level of commitment at this linebacker group. There hasn't been since Bobby Wagner was there. They got rid of Ernest Jones and all that. So I think that they're really settled in with this linebacker group as just being, make sure that you're just not a liability and let the front do its thing and then hope the back end can do its part. Just don't give up the intermediate middle of the field in the pass game so often, and just be solid against the run and keep everything in front of you. Don't allow big breakaway runs. I think they'll be able to pull that off for the most part. You just wish that this group had somebody that you go, this guy's for sure got the upside to be this breakout star this year. They just don't have anyone with that level of upside. It's just okay to good players. I wouldn't say anyone that's going to get any type of playing time on this team is a bad player in any real aspect of the game. Because I think Troy Reeder will be the one that'll come in, in more passing situations if they do have to rotate somebody out. And then you'll see Chris Paul or Fields or Reeder come in running situations where they're still like decent linebacker 3 quality type players. Like there's guys in the league that are starters that aren't going to be as good as them in the run game. So there's at least that's sitting there for them. I do think there's a little bit of room for growth, particularly with Omar Speights. We'll see what this next year brings for him and if he can compound the growth that we saw from last season, because that's also a possibility as well. And if he can get himself into being like this true like middle of the pack linebacker 1 type, then that sort of raises all ships. The high tide raises all ships in that sense. So there is the potential there. I think Nate Landman sort of hovering as your linebacker 1 and Omar Speights hovering as your linebacker 1. They're not, you kind of want one of them to be, the linebacker 2 and have a clear linebacker 1 quality. So we'll see what that ends up being, or if they go out and they try to sign someone, or again, if there's some sort of breakout here. Now, here's the problem. And it was a problem that we talked about up top. It's what the hell are you going to do at the outside corner position with your outside corners? Because down the middle, you pretty much got it solved in between the numbers at the hashes. But you have Darius Williams, you have Ahkello Witherspoon, you have Kobe Durant, you have Darion Kendrick, you have Emmanuel Forbes, all competing to be the top 2 outside corners. Because Quentin Lake's got the nickel dialed in. He's a good player. He has a B- in zone, but he is a converted safety. He's mostly a safety type player. So him being able to man up guys just really isn't in his best interest. Though, had a not so great, but not brutal targets to reception ratio with the yards allowed. Keeping it under 500 yards on 42 catches allowed is pretty decent. 4 pass breakups. Only allowed 2 touchdowns. Kept the passer rating low. Did take 7 penalties. And I think that's just a matter of him getting stuck in man coverage where he just doesn't have the athleticism. So he has to get a little bit grabby to prevent like a massive play from happening. But I don't particularly think Quentin Lake is bad. I think from a like old school traditional, nickel back who's going to be out there and cover like more traditional slot receivers or get on some tight ends and some running backs and step up, particularly in the run game. I think that's fine for him. Though he's one of none, it seems, in terms of their ability to help in the run game. But what are they gonna do from an outside corner perspective here? Darius Williams, veteran player, needs to get back to the level that he was right before he left. Ahkello Witherspoon has kind of always just been like this middling guy. Kobe Durant, what's he? Is he a slot guy? Is he going to be able to be an outside guy? Darian Kendrick, does he have the athleticism and the physicality to play outside? I don't know. He's got the athleticism to do it, to be sustainable throughout a whole year. You got these crazy athletes that play outside wide receiver. I don't know that he's got that aspect to his game. I think as an occasional guy on the field, he's fine. But you need to find a starter out of this group, a true number one. Is Emmanuel Forbes, and how tiny he is and just lanky and small and how unaccomplished he was as a first-round pick in Washington, is he going to be able to have like a renaissance here with the Rams? Are they going to find the spot for him? Are they going to scheme him up properly? I just don't know. Luckily, on the back end, you got Cameron Curl, who's a decent cover safety, and you got Cameron Kitchens, who's also a good cover safety as well. Gave up 4 touchdowns, but only gave up 285 yards. Only took 1 penalty. Kind of played everywhere a little bit, mostly settled in at the safety position. You want to see him get more snaps and get more opportunities here, but I thought he did relatively well. He had really good reps. It just, when he was successfully targeted, it usually resulted in a decent play for the team, but 12 yards a reception, it is what it is with Cameron Kitchens. I think he's another guy who's just not super athletic. Him and Quentin Lake sort of fall into this same category with each other. And we've seen this a lot with the last couple of teams, whether it be Pitre and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's not playing now anyway, or you get, Antoine Winfield and Tyke Smith, or Christian Izien. I think you sort of have that here with Kitchens and Lake, where you're going to be able to be a little bit more inventive with them, which I think will help. Because you need to be, I think, a little bit more creative and a little bit more exotic here with what your defensive backs are doing to make up for what is lacking here, because they're 18th, but they're 18th truly best case scenario. They can't afford an injury. They can't afford somebody to significantly regress. They can't afford Darius Williams to not be a decent player. They can't afford for Kitchens or Quentin Lake to regress in any way, shape, or form from what they gave just a year prior. They need those guys to grow. And it's a scary group to have, because this group could easily regress this season into being the worst group in the league. So it's going to be something that's going to have to be watched. And there's a lot of pressure on this defensive line to make up for what they have going on here. And if their defensive line's not getting home, if they're blitzing and not getting home, this group is going to be the death of this defense. So overall, my 12th ranked defense, 10th in pass defense, 18th in run defense. So they're 10th in pass defense despite the secondary. So if the secondary just can perform as a middle-of-the-pack secondary, they should be fine with what they have going on up front. If the exact opposite happens and the front doesn't repeat what they did a year prior and they get some regression out of Verse and a regression out of Fisk and out of Byron Young, Poona Ford can't replicate what he did with the Chargers, then this defense could, for all intents and purposes, fall apart. Now, from a schedule perspective, they're coming in 17th. 9.5 wins. I got them going over. There's 7 games here where I go, they're for sure winning. They have the blessing of getting the Saints and getting, Tennessee and Indianapolis and Jacksonville. So, they're getting some free wins there. They get Baltimore and Philadelphia both on the road. Like, what a nightmare that is. But they should be able to steal, at minimum 3 divisional wins here. I think they got the 2 home games against Seattle and Arizona. I think they got locked down. Then those 2 road games they have against them, that's going to be the iffy ones that can go either way, but I can see them getting at least one of those. And then it's the games against the Rams. Like, can they split it against the Rams? They're really tight in there in terms of their rankings as well. The 49ers haven't been revealed yet, but they are coming up. Then they got Tampa. They did draw Carolina on the road, which is unfortunate. They did get Houston at home, so that there's something there where they can maybe catch Houston in a home game. They got Detroit at home. They can maybe catch Detroit as well, Tampa. So the schedule does fall in their favor to some degree, and I think, a 10-win season should be well in their books as long as they stay healthy. Now, you get this second half of the season where you got a bunch of these games that can go either way. The either way aspect also really kind of falls on what you're getting from Matt Stafford at this point in time. I think if Stafford's playing, then you should be able, of these 6, push games that I have here, you should be able to snag 3 of them. I think that that's fair. 3, maybe 4 of them. If Stafford isn't playing and it's Jimmy Garoppolo, then if Jimmy Garoppolo is playing one of these yellow marked games, then I would pretty much lean that towards being a loss more than a win. With Stafford, I would go the other way. So it all really depends on what Matt Stafford is doing and what his status is at this point. But overall, a really balanced team. They're my 11th ranked team overall, 9th head coach, 13th offense, 12th defense. Nice, balanced, wonderful. Thank you.
And there it is, my number 11 team, the Los Angeles Rams. 2025 Deep Dive Series. We are now officially heading into the top 10. Let me know what you guys think about what the top 10 might look like here. Let me know what you think of the LA Rams and some of the assessments I had here. And I will see you guys with the next video next time. Like and subscribe.